everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the 5 audiobooks that I thought were the absolute best performances. So normally when I do these audiobook videos, I pretty much tell you the audiobooks that like really drew me in, had a really good narrator or an ensemble cast. And typically it's just looking at the audiobooks that I listened to in 2022, not necessarily 2022 releases. However, for the first time, this will be the 4th year I'm doing this, and this is the first time that my top 5 audiobooks were all 2022 releases. It seems pretty crazy to me. And I'm kind of really happy about that. I'm so happy that the quality of audiobooks that I read this year were in tip-top shape, and that the releases that came out all had amazing audiobooks attached to them. So without further ado, let's jump into my favorite audiobooks of 2022. To start, I do have 3 honorable mentions that I want to just put out there because I think some people will like these and it's a good way to consume these specific books if you're interested. But because I didn't really love the books, or I just reread them for the first time in a while, I don't really want to include them in my favorites of the year. The first one on that list was a reread, and I reread A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. The audiobook is narrated by Jennifer Ekada, and it's pretty fantastic. I think Jennifer does a really good job narrating it, and she tells the story very eloquently. A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas is pretty huge. I feel like I don't have to kind of go into it super detailed, but basically it follows a young girl who's 19 and her family is extremely poor. They're in poverty. They pretty much don't have food to eat. And one day she stumbles into the woods to try to find some food and shoots a very large wolf. But this ends up being a fairy, and the prince from the Spring Court, who is the nearest to their land, he comes to ask for compensation, and in order to do that, he takes Feyre, the main character, into his land as compensation and pretty much gives us her this very lavish life after all. But there's a lot more going on beyond the courts and a lot of things at stake for the humans that lie just beyond their borders. Jennifer does a really good job, like I said, of really kind of bringing you into the scene. Her voice matches Feyre's, maybe not perfectly, but she just has a very nice way of speaking that makes me be able to imagine Feyre very easily. I was able to easily get into the story and I had no problems following along at any point. I just really like how the production was done. It wasn't super over the top, but it was done very well. On a similar note, I also reread Twilight by Stephanie Meyer this year, and this is the first time I've read it since the book came out in the 2000s. Twilight is narrated by Ileana Kadushin, and she again did a really good job. It was very easy to listen to and get into the story of Twilight, following Bella and Edward's love story, if you want to call it that. I really thought I was going to hate this reread of Twilight, and I don't know if it was because of the audiobook, but I ended up having a really fun time with it. And I have very mixed feelings on Twilight to this day. It's fun and it can be a really good time and an easy read. Obviously there are problems within the story, but the narrator was given a job and she excelled in it. So if you are looking to reread Twilight at any point in your life or read it for the first time, I would highly recommend the audiobook. And my last honorable mention is Off to Be a Wizard by Scott Meyer. This is a 2014 release. It's narrated by Luke Daniels, and I didn't care for the book. It wasn't my favorite book of the year. It wasn't my least favorite of the year, but the narration in it is what got me through this entire book. Luke Daniels did an amazing job. Like, you could tell he's probably a voice actor because he had different voices that completely changed who it sounded like was reading the book every single time a new character was introduced. So I had a really fun time listening to this book for that reason. He made it easy to follow along and just made the most out of the story. Like I said, the whole story itself was subpar to me personally, but the audiobook narration was awesome. And if this is a book that you guys are interested in, then I think consuming it via audio is the way to go. With that out of the way, I I would like to move into my actual top 5 favorite audiobooks of 2022. So at the number 5 spot, I have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is narrated by Julia Whalen, and she, again, like the other audiobooks I've already mentioned, does a really good job of bringing you into the story and telling it in such a soothing way that you're hooked and also kind of lulled into this like just visual place in your head to enjoy the book. Book Lovers follows a woman named Nora who ends up going into a small town where one of her clients' books takes place, and she stumbles into another agent named Charlie, and they've always been kind of like secret rivals. I don't think Charlie thinks of it that way, but Nora does. And as they get to know each other more, Nora starts to understand why Charlie passed on one of the best-selling books of all times that Nora represented, and how the town that they're in is really impactful for him. The book is super cute. I really enjoyed it, and Julia's narration really just got me enmeshed into the entire story. I think she's an excellent audiobook narrator, and I would for sure listen to other books narrated by her. On that note, just because I'm using Book Lovers, which came out in 2022, I have also read Beach Read and People We Meet on Vacation, and Julia also narrates those, so any 3 of those books would be great to listen to. At the number 5 spot, I have The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I do wish I was able to put this book a little bit higher, but I am hit and miss with some of the narrators in this. This is a full cast ensemble for the audiobook, and there are 7 narrators total. There's one that's kind of like the omnipresent narrator voice, and then each perspective in the book, there are 6 perspectives, each have another voice actor. Some of the voice actors are amazing, hands down, and one of them is one of my favorite actors, who is Steve West. I love when he narrates books. But a couple, which there was one female and one male voice actor, and truthfully, I can't remember which part they played, so I can't really specify who it was, but there were 2 voice actors that I thought were a little bit more subpar and tended to be lagging in the enjoyment of the book. I would often zone out or get lost when I listened to those specific chapters. However, the rest of the cast, which is the majority, is excellent, and it made it very easy to get into this book. The Atlas 6 is a dark academia tale that follows 6 individuals who are accepted into the Atlas Society. And these are individuals who are gifted with magical powers and tend to be very proficient at specific things that are unique or not seen often in the magical world. This world is like a different type of universe, like a parallel universe where magic is just completely ingrained in the society. I, again, really liked the ideas in this book, and I thought the voice actors were able to give the personalities of each character a little bit more spotlight than it might have been if you were just reading it. In my number 3 spot for best audiobook of the year, I have Impact Winter. This is actually an Audible exclusive, and it is written by the man who created Pacific Rim, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So Travis Beacham was the writer, and this also has a full narration cast. And this is also like a full production audiobook. So not only do you have multiple cast members, but like you have cast members for like even small voices in the background. Like you have the main cast and you have a couple different characters that you follow in the book, but then you also have like background noises, background characters. If they talk about that, like, you know, that they're walking somewhere, you actually hear the walks. So it's not a normal audiobook experience where they're going to tell you that they're walking through the snow. You're actually going to hear them walking rather than being read it. Because of that, I have thought about this audiobook for a while after I read it earlier in the year. And even though maybe the story isn't super unique or that crazy different from other stories I've read, it really was a good time. It's a very quick read. It's a 5-hour long audiobook. And like I said, between like all the visuals and stuff like that you can get in your head based on the sounds, it's a crazy experience. I remember actually like cleaning my house and like I would hear things in the audiobook and like freak myself out and be like, oh my God, someone's knocking on my door or someone's behind me. And it never was. It was just the audiobook. This is a sci-fi fantasy horror book. It follows the events of Earth after a giant asteroid has hit Earth and caused an impact winter, meaning that there's so much dust and debris that went into the air. It blocked out the sun and the Earth became eclipsed in ice and snow. But not only did that happen, but there is the potential that vampires who might have always been on our world have finally gotten the chance to roam freely because the sun is no longer viewable. So like I said, it was a really fun time. If you have Audible, it's the only way you can get it, but it would be worth it to check it out. It is included in your membership if you have Audible regularly. At the number 2 spot, also a 2022 release, is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This has been on everybody's list for a lot of things, I'm sure. It was highly publicized when it came out, and truthfully, I think it's a pretty solid audiobook. Obviously, the book talks about a lot of hard topics and trauma in a relatively humorous way, but the author, Jennette McCurdy, the actress, narrates the whole book herself, and I think it shows that she has very big promise as a writer, as well as uses her acting capabilities to deliver this audiobook. The book follows her entire life story from a very early age and all the traumas that she suffered between her parents fighting, her anxiety, her eating disorders, her OCD, and a lot of other traumas that have happened in the industry and within her family. And after her mom has died, which leads up to this point in her life, she never really knew what it was like to be able to be fully in control of herself. Book was great. You know, I don't know if the writing would necessarily be par if you're going to look at the writing itself, but because she narrates it and you can really just feel the emotion, and like she wrote it, so you can tell when she's giving emotion to certain parts and why. I just think it's excellent. And if you're going to consume this, I would highly recommend listening to the book. And at the number 1 spot was one of my most recent reads, and I truly don't know if I would have given this book a 5 stars had it not been for the audiobook, because I just felt so enraptured by this narrator's voice and the way that she delivered the lines perfectly. At the number 1 spot, I have a Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a book that follows the lovers of Dracula. So I would say brides, but it's not just brides in the traditional sense, because there are 2 females and a male companion that Dracula has, and you primarily follow Constanza, who is Dracula's supposed first wife, and Constanza really going through her life as a vampire with Dracula and trying to make sense of the traumas that he puts her through, and if her feelings for him as well as their other 2 lovers, if it's real or if it's manufactured or if it's a little bit of both. I will likely talk about this book in my favorite books of 2022, but I do really like the rep in this book where the main character has a very positive view of polyamory, but it doesn't shy away from looking at the fact that the relationship dynamic with Dracula is abusive. And I really like that, how you can have something positive, but when it's taken too far by somebody, it can be negative in some circumstances, but not all. That aside, though, this does have some trigger warnings for sexual assault and abuse of power, as well as some like morbidity because they are vampires. But if you are okay with that and you can listen to that with no problem, then Abby Creighton does a fantastic job at narrating this book. The book is pretty short. I think it's just over 5 hours long in total. And like I said, Abby Creighton really just sucks you in. Like, I feel like I am with these brides of Dracula, like through the ages as they come up from like, you know, the late Middle Ages to like getting closer to modern day. I think her line delivery is so succinct and perfect. And I just, even though it wasn't a full ensemble, it wasn't a full production, it was just the narrator telling the story, I felt chills like reading and listening to this book, especially because you realize that the main character, Constanza, is writing letters to Dracula. So she references a you the entire time. And it's understood that it's Dracula, but you don't actually hear that name. And the way that the narrator delivers that, it's kind of eerie, like that, you know, like, you did this to me and here's why. It gives me like a lot of chills like listening to it. So I really love the book itself, which is why it has to be my number one, because I loved the book, I love the narrator, and together it was the best audiobook experience of 2022 for me. With that said, all of these books are fantastic. I don't think, even with my honorable mentions, you could go wrong picking up any of these books. The only way you'd go wrong is if you have no interest in them, or you're not interested in the topics or the triggers that might be included. So, you know, obviously look into the books before you read, but I think all 5 of them are solid audiobook choices. And if you're going to read one of these books, doing it through audio might be the way to go. So let me know down below, what was your favorite audiobook of the year 2022? Let me know if you have any recommendations for me. I always leave down below the link to my Goodreads. On Goodreads, I have an entire shelf for all the audiobooks I listen to in the year. And normally in my reviews, I will mention if I like the narration or not. So if you are interested in following me year round on the audiobook journey, definitely go follow me on Goodreads. And that is it for me today, my friends. Thank you for sticking around, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.